Hi everybody. In this video, I want to review with you some of the most common rhetorical moves and elements in an abstract. This is going to be, well, not a short video per se, but the instruction is going to be very short. I'm just going to show you a lot of examples, and this will help you to prepare for your assignment of the reverse abstract, which is kind of a different assignment than you've done so far. So you have to actually create an abstract from the paper. We're giving you the paper in a, we've retracted the name of the journal and the name of the author. So don't look up the title and look at the abstract. You challenge yourself to write the abstract on your own. I'll post the abstracts once you have posted your assignment, so you can compare yours to it as well. And I'll provide your feedback on that. So let's talk about abstracts. Key elements. So abstract provides an overview of the article. It's usually limited word count, typically 100 to 300 words, although there are some that might go up to 400. It really depends on the journal and the journal convention. So when you're publishing or reviewing for a journal, make sure you're familiar with those. Ultimately, the abstract highlights, provides highlights from each section of the article. And so it's usually structured very much like the in-read article, the same format. And I'll talk about this in a second. And it is the most read part of any article. And think about yourselves, and certainly myself, when we look for articles. We read the abstract first. It behooves us to write the abstract last, because that's when we're most clear about what our articles will say. And I think that's something that Annesley, and I'm struggling with his name. One of these days I get it right. Anyway, when he suggests as well in his article on writing abstracts. So there are, and I've taken this from Annesley as well, and this is common. It's a common division into types of abstracts. You have two types of format: the simple or conventional style and a structured format. And the simple conventional style is sort of just a narrative without any headings, right? Without headings usually. It does follow the IMRAD structure. It just doesn't give you like a heading that says methods or results or something like that. The structured format, on the other hand, does provide these sort of subheadings. And we'll see an example of that in just a second. When it comes to style, there is a descriptive style and informative style. And I always have to think which one is which. Now, the informative style is the more detailed one. Is that right? No. Hey everybody. So I'm gonna talk to you about abstracts. This is our last IMRAD video. Well, maybe if you're watching this before the discussion videos, then it won't be your last, but it's the last in sort of our succession, starting with the intro, methods, results, discussion, and abstract last, although the abstract is the first abstract that will be read. So I'm going to review some of the key rhetorical moves and elements for successful abstracts that will help you to write your abstracts. Your assignment this week for abstracts is a little different than the other assignments, and it's a bit of a creative assignment, I think, where you have to construct an abstract based on an article, and you have two choices there, so you can choose either one of those. And if you really want to practice abstracts, feel free to submit abstracts for both of those, but I'm sure you have other things to do than write random abstracts. But choose one of those papers. Don't look up the papers. We did retract the authors' names and the journal titles from the screenshots and of the PDFs, but if you probably look up for the title, you can find it. So don't do it. Really challenge yourself to write the abstract before looking what the actual abstract looks like. And I know what the abstracts look like, so if you submit something that looks similar, I know you might have taken a peek. And I will give you comments on the abstract as well, and I will provide the real quote-unquote abstracts after you submit them as well. I'll either email them to you or post them somewhere. I haven't quite figured it out yet. So let's talk about abstracts. Some key elements are that an abstract provides an overview of the article. It's usually limited in word count, and it's typically 100 to 300 words, although sometimes you can see some to go up to 400 words. This again depends on the journal conventions. So if you're writing for a journal, reviewing for a journal, make sure you're familiar with those conventions. Typically, the abstract provides highlights from each section of the article, right? So it follows that IMRAD format. and some more closely than others, and we'll look at this in a second. And it is the most read part of the article, any article. This is the part that everybody reads before they even take a look at the actual manuscript. So it needs to be clear, concise, to the point, and actually provide a good overview, right, of what the article is saying. And so let's take a closer look at some ways to do that by looking at the kinds of types of abstracts that exist. And if you read the ends of the article or read an abstract, this will look familiar because he mentions those two. So there's two formats. There's a simple conventional style, which is kind of like, I like to call it also, well, they're all narrative, but I like to call it a narrative style, and it's usually without headings. But for an empirical article, for an IMRAD-based article, you can kind of see where each section, which sentence covers each section. So keep that in mind as well. The structured format has headings, and the journal guidelines will tell you which headings to use. Sometimes they want goals and objectives. Sometimes they want background and objectives, aims, different terms for the same thing. Just like with the headings, remember for IMRAD, like introduction can be background and objective or something like that. When it comes to style, there are two different styles, descriptive and informative. And we're going to look at some examples in a second, and I'll explain those differences in just a moment. Before we continue, the one thing I want to mention is going back to this. Actually, no, we're going to do this here. I want to review briefly some common elements in most IMRAD abstracts. Okay, and so there is the background, which usually comes from the introduction. Something on the hypothesis, the aims, the question coming from the introduction as well. And clear language here is really helpful. We ask that, we hypothesize that. If you can include that, that really helps. You'll say something about the experiment, which comes from the methods, about key findings, which comes from results, present a conclusion, which comes from the discussion section, your takeaway message, and then possibly implications as well, depending on how much room you have. And so my rule of thumb is a sentence to two for each of these, and most likely you will have most on the methods and results for your typical empirical paper, because methods and results tend to be the most voluminous in nature in the abstract. So sometimes you have 2 to 3 sentences here, maybe just one for each of these. So you can play around with that. I've seen some writers just literally lift verbatim sentences and just plug them into the abstract, which doesn't always make for the greatest reading, right? Because the sentences were written in a different context, but it's a way to start, right? And especially for your assignment where you have to create a reverse abstract of an article that you did not write. It might be interesting to mark some key sentences and see if you take those and puzzle them together. That would be a good first draft, so to speak. Of you have to don't finish there. You have to kind of, you have to make it into a better narrative. But it's one way to kind of make sense out of a large article and do a reverse abstract like you are doing for your paper, for your assignment. So let's look at some of these different types: simple versus simple and informative abstract, informative versus descriptive, and so on. So informative abstract is usually the wordier one. And on your handouts, you'll have copies of these abstracts with the word count as well. I didn't have enough room to put them in here, but barely, as you see here, cramming all the text here, but I just wanted to have it here because I'm going to highlight some things in the next few slides. So make sure you have the handout ready to look at as well, because it's going to be easier for you to read and to follow. Let's see this simple and informative abstract. And simple means that there are no headings in here, right? It's just a narrative. It's not structured, even though it is actually structured. And I'll show you in a second how clearly that is, how clearly you can see that. This comes again from the research ethics article that we've been looking at. The first sentence provides the background. Recent studies from Western countries, blah, 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 blah. Maybe know this already. You've read this part so many times, or this information so many times. The next sentence clearly presents the hypothesis, the aims, the research question, and so on. So the first two sentences come straight from the information that's usually in the introduction of an article. Then the next, I think this is all one long sentence if I remember correctly. Yes, it is indeed. This comes from the method section. We distributed an anonymous questionnaire and so on. A, B, this kind of helps structure this a little bit. So anything you can do with this kind of big textbook, the structure helps. And then here are the results. So here is our 2 sentences for the results. But again, if you look at the length, right, this is a lot longer than the first part, and this is also a lot longer than the first part. So methods and results, as I said, usually are pretty heavy in terms of the volume in an abstract. And then the authors end with the parts from the discussion, which shows their most significant result, right? A significant predictor of the lack of prior ethics training, which this whole article is about. And it also provides that what further studies could do, namely they needed to confirm whether our results can be generalized to other universities and movies. So it really clearly follows the IMRAD discussion. And one thing that I forgot to mention earlier, that you might have noticed already, and if you read Annen's article, you should notice, no citations. That is very, very common. Actually, in Annen's article, there's a really nice table that includes some of the key rhetorical moves and elements of a well-structured, well-done abstract. So keep that in mind as you're creating your reverse abstract, and in general in the future as you're writing abstract as well as reviewing them. Let's look at some more example. So descriptive abstract, and this comes from the next two abstracts come from the same example from an article in Science, example 2 on your handout. And this one is a descriptive abstract. So this one is written not clearly following necessarily the IMRAD structure. So mapping of genetic interactions is usually based on cell fitness. It's the phenotypic readout, which obscures the mechanistic origin of interactions. Norman et al., which are the authors in here, developed a framework for mapping and so on. This is one that's actually fairly short. I think it was maybe 123 words, if I remember correctly. So it's fairly short. It's written in this particular context in Science, in the magazine Science, the journal Science, for lay audience or for an audience not as familiar with the topic of this research field. And again, it's shorter. It doesn't go into great detail about findings. It just provides a quick overview, 100 words or less. So this actually is a little longer than your typical descriptive abstract, but they are fairly short. And then the same thing here, a simple and informative abstract based on the same article that follows much more closely the IMRAD format, and I highlighted this again for you. So the first sentence is the introduction background. The next sentence, also a longer one, provides sort of the methods or the kind of the project, the experiment that these authors were doing. That all to do with CRISPR technology, which is a really interesting topic. And I think we have a book on our book list about the CRISPR technology, and by the time I'm recording this, I won't know if any of you have selected it, but it's a really interesting book. I've read it a few years ago. I actually listened to it. It was very interesting. So if you're interested in this issue of DNA and DNA kind of cutting, there's a different word for it that I can't think of right now. It's sequencing. It's really interesting. Anyways, going back to this method section here. The next section, so the results, namely the applications, in this case, what came out of the study or this article, and then at the end, the discussion implication of this work, right? So again, it's unstructured in a sense, it's simple, but it doesn't include any of the structuring kind of elements, but it's still following that IMRAD structure. And then last but not least, here comes our drug safety study. This is the last time, if you're watching this, is the last video of IMRAD. But I think you have to look at this study. I don't think I'm using it in any of the other modules. So here you have, and I didn't copy and paste the screenshot because in case I want to be able for folks with screen readers to potentially look at this PowerPoint as well if they need it. But so that's why I copied and pasted it in here. You see there's some bleeding over into the parts. So look at it on your handout. It's easier to look at it there. But anyways. The background and objective right here, methods, results, conclusions, those are typical headlines for these structured and also informative abstracts. So most of the abstracts we looked at, 3 of them are informative and 1 of them was descriptive. Again, descriptive is the one that is shorter and doesn't necessarily follow the IMRAD format. Descriptive abstracts are also very popular for articles that don't follow the IMRAD format. So they're kind of like a mini summary. So again, this one is actually pretty long. Oh, I forgot how many words, but you have it on your sheet, so you can see it's a lot of text. But again, it's a big study, as we've noticed throughout the last few modules, a large clinical study. So this is it. There's so much about abstracts. Have fun with your slightly creative assignment of reversing the abstract, and I look forward to reading those.